The royal drive to Parliament is always a popular event. But on this occasion, behind the pageantry is an awareness that Parliament faces grave issues on which the peace of the world may depend. For Israel and Egypt are at war, and Her Majesty's government have set themselves the task of bringing that war to an end.
It was in the House of Commons that the government's decision was announced following Israel's advance into Egypt. Sir Anthony said, "Britain and France have called upon Egypt and Israel to stop all warlike action forthwith and to withdraw their military forces to a distance of 10 miles from the canal." He also indicated possible action to separate the belligerents and to guarantee freedom of transit through the canal.
Egypt rejected the ultimatum. So Britain and France acted.
Flown from aircraft carriers were hundreds of sorties attacking military targets near Port Said. This followed up heavy bombing raids which had already put Egyptian airfields out of service and all but destroyed Nasser's air force.
All my life, I've been a man of peace. Working for peace, striving for peace, negotiating for peace. I've been a League of Nations man and a United Nations man. And I'm still the same man, with the same convictions, the same devotion to peace. I couldn't be other, even if I wished. But I'm utterly convinced that the action we have taken is right.
At Port Said Harbor and nearby, British troops came ashore. They were consolidating the work already done by paratroops and marine commandos in occupying this famous town at the north end of the Suez Canal. The capture of Port Said was more difficult than was expected. Fires were still burning, result of house-to-house fighting, which General Keighley has described as very tough. But as the reinforcements came in, the battle was over. Happily, at surprisingly little cost, just over 100 killed and wounded.
Today, November the 7th, there's a ceasefire. The canal's ours, as the Daily Mail reports. Objective achieved. Those who supported Sir Anthony Eden in the Egyptian crisis and those who attacked him shared the same feeling at his news of the ceasefire. It was one of immense relief. Scenes like these are a great shock to many in Britain and to most of the world. Only 2 years ago, all had seemed well between Britain and Egypt when both had agreed to the withdrawal of British troops from Egypt within 20 months. In September 1954, the agreement was signed. Some saw this withdrawal after 72 years as Britain's greatest break with her past since her withdrawal from India. Winston Churchill and many Conservative MPs were not pleased. But the Egyptians celebrated with great parades of their own forces. In February last year, on the way to the Far East, Eden stopped to visit Nasser to talk about the proposed Baghdad Pact. Both men seem to have got on well enough. Now everyone appears bewildered by the shock of the events of the past few days. The Americans don't seem to want to help their chief ally. The United States not going to war, Eisenhower declares, was the Arizona Republic's headline on November the 1st. Perhaps because it's election year and Eisenhower wants to be president again. At the United Nations Assembly in New York, people have found the actions of Britain, France and Israel hard to understand, even to believe.
I doubt that any delegate ever spoke from this forum with as heavy a heart as I have brought here tonight. We speak on a matter of vital importance, where the United States finds itself unable to agree with three nations with whom it has ties of deep friendship, of admiration and respect, and two of whom constitute our oldest, most trusted and reliable allies.
And as the Daily Express reported last week, Eisenhower has wanted the United Nations to handle the crisis. Vicky's cartoon, Divided We Stand, summed it up last Friday. Eden's policy, which has divided the nation, the Commonwealth, the Allies, and the United Nations. So how have the British got into this situation? True to the 1954 agreement, the last British troops had left Egypt by June this year. The end of foreign troops and their families on Egyptian soil was expected to be the keynote of Nasser's speech on the 4th anniversary of Egypt's revolution. But CBS reported greater news.
On July 26th, Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company. At Alexandria, an inflamed and engulfing crowd heard President Nasser say, at this moment, some of your brothers are now taking over the Suez Canal. The canal, he said, is the property of Egypt. 120,000 Egyptian workers died digging the canal.
A simple explanation of British policy would be to say it's an overreaction to the nationalization of the canal. But that happened 3 months ago. And as the Prime Minister broadcast to the nation on August the 8th,
our quarrel is not with Egypt, still less with the Arab world. It is with Colonel Nasser. We all know this is how fascist governments behave. And we all remember, only too well, what the cost can be in giving in to fascism. We cannot agree that an act of plunder, which threatens the livelihood of many nations, should be allowed to succeed.
On July the 28th, The Times had foreseen chaos. Editorial opinion held that an international waterway of this kind cannot be worked by a nation with low technical and managerial skills such as the Egyptians. Others had feared Nasser would attack Western shipping or cut the oil route. In fact, the Egyptians have run the canal very efficiently, and there's been no threat to the West. In July, Nasser was interviewed by CBS reporter Edward Murrow.
Has there ever been a time during this crisis when you thought the British and French might actually use force?
Well, of course, because of these threats of use of force, concentrations, and movement of troops, I thought that any time I'll be facing an act of aggression. Until now, I'm still thinking. No, I think it is a matter of prestige. I think they are sure that we will not close the canal or raise the tolls. Because if we close the canal, we'll be in trouble. Suppose we close the canal against Britain, what will be the result? Britain will have the cause to defend her interests, to defend her economy, and then they will be able to have an aggressive action against Egypt. I don't think at all that we will be in a position to be in war with Britain. And I think British are sure that we will not have any discrimination against them, against their lifeline, as they said, against their economy. But really it is a matter of prestige.
Throughout the summer, Dulles, the American Secretary of State, arranged meetings in London with the Canal Users Association and at the UN, seeking a working solution to satisfy all users of the canal and to avoid any hostile action. In October, agreement was reached on the 6 principles.
The world was indeed happy to share the gratification of President Eisenhower yesterday when he opened his televised conference by saying, I have an announcement. I have got the best announcement that I could possibly make to America tonight. Egypt, Britain, and France have met through their foreign ministers and agreed on a set of principles on which to negotiate, and it looks like here is a very great crisis that is behind us.
In Britain, there was still great concern. We have to remember the well-established British attitude towards Egypt. In 1875, Disraeli had bought all the shares in the canal held by Egypt's ruler, the Khedive, whose government was in great financial trouble. The Khedive invited the British to help him put down a rebellion in 1882. The British were encouraged to stay on to keep order and to secure the canal. Two ideas became fixed: that the Egyptians were incompetent and that the canal was the key to the quickest route to India and the lifeline of the empire. Most of Britain's empire lay beyond Suez. Egypt was still independent in name, but in reality was under British control. In 1936, this control was made legal.
Mr. Anthony Eden presided when the Anglo-Egyptian Pact was signed.
Of their common interest and the symbol of a freely agreed and enduring partnership between the British and Egyptian people.
For Egypt, the treaty was signed by the Premier, Nahas Pasha. For Britain, by Mr. Eden, the Foreign Secretary. Outside the Foreign Office, Nahas Pasha made a short speech for the GB camera.
I'm very happy to sign the treaty. Treaty is friendship and alliance between the two people, friends, England and Egypt.
By the 1930s, Egypt was Britain's largest overseas military base. During the Second World War, a large part of the British armies served in Egypt and fought to defend the country against Nazi Germany. After the war, the Egyptians thought the numbers of British troops would be reduced, as had been promised in the 1936 agreement. But now the British saw the canal facing what they thought was a new potential threat from Russia. So the British stayed. This was regarded by many Egyptians as a breach of faith, and they began guerrilla attacks on the British. In October 1951, the Egyptian government said Britain had broken the 1936 agreement and tore it up. But British newsreels gave this view of events.
Anti-British posters are swept along on a rising tide of nationalism, as Egyptians of all classes heap abuse upon the country that defended their frontiers in World War II.
There was little sympathy in Britain for Egyptian nationalists and their actions, especially when the violence became worse. British attitudes had been influenced for many years by the troops' own experiences in Egypt. For the ordinary soldier stationed there, the slums of Cairo, the beggars of Alexandria, the thieving and the mob attacks had led to contempt. This contempt was often shared by their officers. King Farouk had been widely reported in the British press as a corrupt playboy. After the coup of 1952, his successors appeared very honest.
From Cairo come these first authentic pictures of the bloodless coup by which the army took over control of Egypt. It was the end of the king's attempt to maintain power. To the ordinary Egyptian, the change is welcome, and it seems that Mohammed Naguib is assured of support at home. What the change will mean to the rest of the world, we have yet to see.
First, General Naguib, then Colonel Nasser, who succeeded him, seemed simple soldiers doing their best for their country. They stopped the guerrilla campaign against the British, but they also sought help from the Americans to get rid of British troops.
During the course of their talks, Secretary Dulles, while seeking the safeguarding of the Suez Canal, agrees that a withdrawal of foreign troops should be effected as soon as Suez guarantees can be made.
Well, this was done. Most of Britain supported Eden in the final withdrawal of British troops, as they have supported him in his attacks on the nationalisation of the Canal. As the News of the World put it on the 29th of July, if the Prime Minister stands firm, and he's given every indication of so doing, the common sense of the British people will be behind him. But, as the Daily Mirror warned in August, no war over Egypt. So why has Eden risked this support by turning from peace to war? Does Eden think Nasser is out to destroy all British influence in the Middle East? Was this behind the cancelled Anglo-American loan to complete a dam across the Nile at Aswan, Nasser's great project? Is the result all right, no dam, no canal, as Vicky pointed out in July in the Daily Mirror? Eden has even compared Nasser to Hitler, and some of the press have supported him. Nasser's use of Cairo radio to spread propaganda and to attack Arab governments friendly to Britain does remind us of Goebbels and Radio Berlin in World War II. Some claim Khrushchev is behind Nasser, as Illingworth's cartoon The Man Behind the Man shows. Has Nasser become a communist puppet, as Cummings has drawn in today's Daily Express? Nasser says not. Britain and the United States wouldn't give arms, and they stopped the aid, so he was forced to turn to Russia. But is there more to it all than this, as Illingworth's cartoon has suggested? In Britain, the opposing views have been put to the nation in public broadcasts by the Prime Minister and by the Leader of the Opposition. So divided is the nation that the BBC overruled the Prime Minister's opposition to a televised reply.
What should we do? We put the matter to the Security Council. Should we have left it at that? Should we have been content to wait to see whether they would act? How long would this have taken?
The Council had met, reached a clear decision, and been blocked by the Prime Minister's own veto. There was no lack of speed here. The trouble was obstruction. Obstruction by Great Britain.
What we did do was to take police action at once. Action to end the fighting and to separate the armies. We acted swiftly and reported to the Security Council, and I believe that before long it will become apparent to everybody that we acted rightly and wisely.
It is not a police action. There is no law behind it. We have taken the law into our own hands. The Prime Minister has said we were going in to separate the two sides. But you don't separate two armies by bombing airfields and landing troops 100 miles behind one side only. No, this is a second onslaught on a country which was already the victim of an attack.
One fact alone is clear. Opinion, once firmly behind the government, is now bitterly divided. There's even the suggestion of a plot between Britain, France and Israel to topple Nasser. This is what Americans read in their press last Wednesday. The missing link in the fighting in Egypt is this. Did the British, French and Israelis plan it together? It looks that way. All three stood to gain by what they did. Who is telling the truth?